So this is a session that is different from the others that we've had so far. This will be an opportunity for you to meet some key stakeholders in the dietary supplement community. On the one side, there will be members of the dietary supplement industry, and we'll be hearing from three of our colleagues in different parts of the industry. You'll have an opportunity to talk with them as a group, and then we'll ask three other people to talk who we called them the watchdogs, but it's only to stimulate some conversation. They represent organizations that have an interest in messaging to consumers and in terms of safety of products that are in the marketplace. We'll talk with them for a bit, and then we'll ask all of the members of the two panels to join together in answering questions that might have arisen where you might be interested in hearing from both groups of people. We always appreciate it when our colleagues from the industry and from the media and from other organizations join us for this. We don't deliberately set this up as it's not a fight. It is a very important opportunity for you to hear from people who have a different stake in issues related to dietary supplements. And it's also a good opportunity for them to be able to share perspectives with you, who represent a quite different audience. So I'm not going to waste any time. We're actually a little ahead, but I know my colleagues, because we've done this before, they'll take every minute that they've got, and mine. So we're going to get started. The first person we've asked to talk with you is Michael McBurney, who is from DSM Nutritionals. And Michael actually has the distinction of being one of the very few people in this room who's been both a student and now a speaker for the Practicum. So welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Paul. Yes, indeed, 9 years ago, I was here as a student in this session, so it's a real pleasure to be back. And to share, at that point, I was at Texas A&M University, and today I am with DSM Nutritional Products, and so I'm willing and here to give you a perspective from industry, which will be different than what we have heard today. Part of that is to let you know who DSM is, because you won't know us. We're a business to business. We're a company that's over 100 years old. DSM stands for Dutch State Mines. It started as a coal mining company, and it progressed through that in terms of, you think about the distillation, fractionation, the capital equipment that's needed in order to take coal and transform it into other products. That is organic chemistry at its root. And so it became a company that then started to make other things. In 2000, just after the early 2000s, it acquired the vitamin business from Roche Vitamins. And we are the largest manufacturer of vitamins in the world with the broadest portfolio. About 5 years ago, we acquired and moved into the algal and fish oil areas to also be the largest supplier. So if you are going to eat a fortified food, or an infant formula, or a dietary supplement, or a pharmaceutical product, we're hoping that it is going to have our vitamins or our omega-3s or lutein or zeaxanthin in that product. So I'm going to be speaking to you as a nutritionist today. We also have a history of, we have products like resveratrol and others, isoflavones that the company explored, and really the challenges of taking new ingredients, putting them through the safety, the generally recognized as safe, and taking advantage, educating, and then having the opportunity to sell them in large quantities is very challenging. So we have really refocused on our vitamins and omega-3s. The company is half material sciences, half life sciences, because we have a large organic chemistry and resins and floor coatings and plastics. In the nutrition area, we're equally sized in animal nutrition for animal feeds, as well as human nutrition and a small personal care. Last year, we sold almost 8 billion euros of products. We have over 3,000 employees here in North America. 50%, 6% of our employees, over half, are outside of Europe as a Dutch-based company, and 65% of our sales are outside of Europe. For someone like me, a nutrition scientist, working in the company, what do we do? Well, we help advance nutrition science. So we guide the R&D programs and have input in that. We do a lot of research identifying, and I will share with you today, the global micronutrient gaps that there are, because we live in a world where 2/3 may be obese and overweight, but that is often coupled with hidden hunger. And by hidden hunger, I mean a pervasive lack of essential nutrients, vitamins and minerals, in our diets. We publish this science, and we also build awareness. So we work closely, myself and my team in North America, going to our customers, talking to them about their formulations, helping them think through what are the requirements, who's the target audience, talking with key opinion leaders, working with the American Society for Nutrition, other trade associations, Council for Responsible Nutrition, Mr. Steve Mister that we'll hear later today, and engaging with these stakeholders. And I'm going to give you a very different perspective than we heard today. We saw this slide earlier by Dr. Christine Taylor in terms of defining what nutrient requirements are and sort of looking, and she was talking about the upper level, the UL. And if you go back and read those Institute of Medicine documents, you see, and this is a story for vitamin D, that really those were often developed in the 40s, 50s, and 60s because we knew what was essential for deficiency diseases, and we wanted to prevent those diseases. So once we knew that iodine solved goiter, once we knew the B vitamins were involved with beriberi, pellagra, and others, rickets for vitamin D, our nutrition science started to develop into adequate intakes and DRIs. And we did this using information like this slide. This shows the dose response of vitamin D versus serum 25-hydroxy-D levels. And it shows also at each concentration that we're very unique. There's lots of variability in where we actually sit on that line if we have an intake. This is deficiency, being less than 20 nanomoles per liter, and we didn't want people to be deficient, so the IOM defined an intake that was needed, that blue line, where 97.5% of the population is above that line, meaning only that 2.5% would fall within that deficiency, or risk of deficiency, right? Then in 2008 or so, there was a new Institute of Medicine created a new committee to look at calcium and vitamin D. And for the first time, this was an IOM that actually looked at optimizing health, not just deficiency. And they reviewed the literature and said there was enough information on bones to actually look at it. This is some of the data that they use that shows walk speed and time for standing against concentration. And if you look in this green zone, that's where they realized that you needed to be on the left side of, or on the right side of this, over here at 50 nanomoles per liter, because if you were down here at 20, there was a huge biological impact for most people. That they had very poor standing times, and you needed to be more in the 50 range. Some people would argue you need to be further over in 75. But the IOM said 50. And then if you look here, in order to have people at over 50, you need to drop down to an 800 IU per day. So we had a new DRI for vitamin D in 2010. This is really significant, and I want you to remember it because it's done two things. One, it's finally on health. It's not just preventing deficiency, but it's talking about what do you need to have for optimal health. It's also important because the NIH, with the help of the Office of Dietary Supplements and Standards, finally had put in place prior to that official standards for measuring serum 25-hydroxy-D. There was now a standard. There was the ability to measure it. Prior to that, the IOM committees couldn't come up with this because all the data that was out there was noise. It couldn't really be merged into a meta-analysis. Now, we have our dietary guidelines intake, so keep that as a backdrop. With the dietary guidelines, you can see that most of us are failing to eat recommended amounts of vegetables, fruit, total grains, dairy, protein foods. Also, work that's been published shows that if you don't eat fortified foods, people that are only eating foods that are naturally rich in nutrients, that this is the proportion that wouldn't get the estimated average requirement for vitamin D, E, folate, vitamin A. You can see it's huge. That's why there were deficiency diseases in the US in the 1920s, 1930s, because we hadn't started mass fortification programs. With fortification, it's impacted some of those, folate especially, because there's mandatory fortification, but not vitamin D, because the law prohibits and restricts the foods that can be fortified with vitamin D. Not many foods are fortified with vitamin E, so you can see that there's an improvement, though, with fortification. And in people that use dietary supplements, the risk of inadequate intakes gets much, much better, shown here in the green. But today we're talking about whether supplements are good or bad, and whether you're over the upper limit. I want you to think about a story. Think about yourselves. Everybody's taken a bath, right? Haven't you experienced that bath that's always leaking? And so you have to sort of figure, how much water am I running into this in order to have a pleasant bath? Because it's no fun sitting in 1 inch to 2 inches of water. Okay? You also don't want to be running so much water in that it overflows. So our bodies are like a bathtub. Okay? And there's many sizes and types of bathtubs, as there are bodies. And so the Institute of Medicine's recommended intakes are sort of saying, we've surveyed all the bathtubs in the US. We know what the average size is. We know what the average rate they leak is. And we know what the average inflow of water is for these tubs. And so we recommend that you turn the faucet to just here, and that's going to be the good bath for you. It's not. We know that. So the only way we can determine deficiencies, just like the only way we can determine obesity is to measure ourselves on bathroom scales, we measure, and with good news is with vitamins, we can measure status. This is the CDC's most recent data. It's nationally representative data. 10.5% of the US population is low enough vitamin B6 levels to be declared as deficient clinically. For women 12 to 49, it's 9.5% on iron. Vitamin D's 8% could be defined as having rickets. 6% for vitamin C could be defined as having scurvy. That's almost 1 out of 20 in the US. This is a horrible standard. It's a horrible bar, excuse me. But this is the accurate data on what that person's status would be. So we have been involved at DSM. I've been leading, looking at this and data that's nationally representative. So this is vitamin D data. Looking at deficiency at 20 nanomoles per liter, looking at who's at 50, and looking at who's at 80. And the population then, we see that we have 7% that are deficient, 26% that are at the recommended level, and 64 or 26% below the recommended level, and 64% below 75. Vitamin C and mortality. This is data that comes from the UK, or the European study, 20,000 people, that's looking at vitamin C concentrations and relative risk. Okay. It shows the lowest risk at 73 micromoles per liter. The highest risk at 21, which is a relative risk of 1. This is looking at US data. So the 75 is that black line that goes across the top. So if you look at supplement users, we have 80%, so we have 20% that are above that. If you look at non-supplement users, you have 38% that are below, aren't there, 62% that are below. Supplement users are more likely to be better nourished. Now, that doesn't mean, and I am not suggesting that we want to have people up at 135, but we really don't want to have 50% of the population down here, or to have 10% that are deficient. Vitamin E, if you go back in the 80s, there was a huge amount of research that was done with vitamin E supplementation. This again is a curve looking at the risk. I want you to see most of the studies that were done had people starting at a baseline here, and there was an increased risk of cancer, of dying with vitamin E supplementation at high dose. But look at the shape of this curve. Look at the decrease. That's relevant because these are the numbers of people that are below that optimal level. If you're not using the supplement, 81% of people are below that concentration. Omega-3 index, we know that there's a huge decrease in the risk of cardiovascular death as you get above 7 to 8% omega-3 index. 97% of Americans are below 4%. So in summary, we know that nutrient deficiencies are very, very common in the US. 1/3 of Americans have at least one nutrient deficiency. Iodine, B6, and D are the most common. We know that dietary supplement users and multivitamin supplement users have a much lower prevalency of deficiency. And those that aren't using them are the ones that need them the most. So we need to be cautious. I believe we need to measure status, but we certainly don't need to discourage those who aren't using supplements from taking them. Thank you. And by that, I mean multivitamin supplements. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. It's always nice to see people standing up and giving a standing ovation. It's now a pleasure we'll take questions later, okay, Michael? If you, it's up to you whether you want to sit there where you can't see the slides. It's a pleasure now to introduce Merle Zimmerman from the American Herbal Products Association, who's going to give perspective on the association that he represents and the work that they do. So, Merle?
Hey, everyone. Positively delighted to be here today. I've got plenty of slides in the deck, so don't be afraid. I'm going to skip many of them. But be afraid, I'm going to probably get you to stand up and move around just a little bit because I know I was half asleep yesterday afternoon after lunch about this time. And this is exciting stuff. So the goal of this set of sessions was to give everybody a chance to look at the perspectives and how dietary supplements are considered, how we address the challenges in different stakeholder areas. I'm from the American Herbal Products Association. We're a trade group, a trade organization that was founded in 1982 to support the responsible commerce of herbal products. We have about 400 member companies, including both domestic and international companies, in two classes, members and affiliates. Members are directly involved in growing, processing, manufacturing, and marketing herbs and herbal products. Affiliates have the same sets of interests and serve the same constituents, but aren't involved in that leaf to table sort of process. So in particular, dietary supplements, when we talk about all uses of botanical products, there's a huge variety of them. They appear in a lot of places on Earth. So let's get started. There's 6 main areas of activity that we do in relation to dietary supplements. We do representation of industry to regulators, the Food and Drug Administration, the Federal Trade Commission, United States Department of Agriculture, our U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services, Department of Commerce. California has a huge market, and they have an office that deals with adulteration that we work with too, and legislators as well. So aside from representation, education is another big thing that we're focused on at Appa, both with training opportunities, looking at current good manufacturing practices, meetings with FDA, product labeling, as well as lots of guidance documents. You've seen the new dietary ingredients, abbreviations, you've seen adverse event reports talked about. Companies are required to report serious adverse events to FDA. So we want to help make sure all the responsible actors are fully aware and can fully act on that responsibility. We do some communication, both to members and to media, and we're really engaged with self-regulation. We get together expert working groups of folks that are in industry who know best how to do the best, and then try to put them together to get their expertise out in the field, out in the halls of downtown, where it's most useful. We also do direct member support and collaboration with groups like AOAC International, our newly renamed National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health, NIST, the office here at NIH of Dietary Supplements, United States Pharmacopoeia, and so forth. So the big sections that I'm going to make aware of what we're up to have to do with self-regulation. There's a bunch of stuff in there, our work with regulators, and so forth. So let's, without further ado, get started with an interruption. Could everyone with names starting from A to Z stand up, please? A to Z. A to Z. Look around, everyone committed to doing the right thing. Figure of authority says, let's make something happen, let's do our best. Here you go, you can look around. Some folks are still sitting, but I'm sure you stood up in your minds. 100% support it. So thank you very much. You feel free to sit down. So Appa publishes a number of documents, such as Herbs of Commerce, which was mentioned yesterday a few times, to deal with standardized common names, to help bridge the communication between the experts, the herbalists, the industry members who look at the scientific nomenclature, and the general public. This was incorporated by FDA in 1997 by reference as a reference for the common names. We've gone up to more than 2,000 different plants, approaching 3,000 very quickly. We also publish tons of guidances for industry, other guidances, looking at all sorts of issues that have to deal with sustainable harvesting, with good manufacturing, with business-related things with contract manufacturers, taking advantage of all the opportunities we have to excel at providing excellent products for America and for the world. So you can read these slides later. I'm not going to read them to you. I put them in the deck so you'd be aware of what we're up to. But also maybe of interest, we have our own NDI database where we've done analysis of the new dietary ingredient notifications that have been made available by FDA. And they're searchable and everything. So there's further support for the experts in industry who are depending on access and progress. Possibly of greater interest right now, if you'd like to raise your hand if you're interested in botanical safety. I know I am. So this book, the first edition, talked about around 550 herbs. It had 150 references, talked about safety issues. We came up with a second edition, partially funded by ODS. Thank you guys so much. Thank you. Really appreciate it. And appreciated by the public. That got us up to more than 700 herbs or so. And we have tons of references to primary literature. Some herbs had more than 60 references. We have this one actually available online. And it also talks somewhat about drug interaction, which is a big topic, an important topic, the more that herbs and combinations of herbs are being used in the consumer market. Third edition's in development, so hopefully we'll be able to report that at the next practicum. So other than these reference documents, Appa works on technical training. We have an all-day event like one day of this for industry, super intense, super compressed, as well as a bunch of events that deal with practical identification method training, from high-performance thin layer chromatography, high-performance thin layer chromatography, liquid chromatography, all the way up to organoleptic analysis and microscopy. Another thing you may have run into, excuse me, is Appa has an online repository where we collected a bunch of freely accessible and public domain identity information. So if you know someone who's doing identity work, who's already an expert, and they want to have a quick lookup for a few things that we've identified and located, botanicalauthentication.org will bring you right to the Appa compendium. We have entries for a few hundred herbs, and they have lots of imagery and stuff. Browse it at your leisure. I'm not going to talk about it today. It's pretty cool, though. I was in charge of it, so. Working with regulators is not something that I did personally too much. Appa has tons of comments with regulators to tap into that industry expertise and to try to share some concerns in some ways to optimize new rules, new regulation, so that it supports responsible, safe, and efficient commerce. Most lately, we've been looking at FSMA-related issues. There's a new NDI draft guidance, which we have a bunch of comments in on. Aside from offering comments, constructive feedback, we wholeheartedly support our government's efforts to stomp on these folks who are pretending to make supplement products but are just selling drug products that are fake and labeled as supplements. So we follow up. We have our own site where we highlight all the ones that FDA has called out. Please keep doing that. If FDA is here, I don't know if you are. We appreciate the hard work. And good manufacturing practices are always important, so I put them on the slide deck like 12 times. We can skip it this time. So we also advocate for new legislation. The serious adverse event reporting requirement for dietary supplements was something near and dear to Appa's heart. We were trying to get that to work, and it's gotten to work. And it's provided a lot of evidence that regarding safety, and has caught these signal events, which let people work with government to get products that were unsafe off the market right away. So aside from our outreach in that way, we have a Educational Research and Botanicals Foundation that currently is doing sponsoring academic research. And the project that's wrapping up right now is involved with OSHA's harvest sustainability. So it's wild harvested. It occurs in the mountains. We've partnered with a fellow at the University of Kansas to try and look at data on variable harvest pressures in the wild. So that's getting done this year, I think. We'll have some really exciting things. I'm looking forward to seeing the paper. Other than this, we have a few resources for consumers that we'd like to provide. In particular, if I could highlight Herb Day, Appa usually co-sponsors an event if you're at an industry event like Expo West or Supply Side, where you can visit an herbarium and tour it with some experts. They explain stuff about herbs. It's really cool. So highly recommend looking into that if you're at an industry event. And thank you very much. I know we all want to get through this and get to the questions ASAP. Thank you very much.
So now it's a pleasure to introduce our colleague, Steve Mister, who is the President and CEO of the Council for Responsible Nutrition. He'll tell you about his organization and the role that they play. But one of the things that you should know about Steve is that he's been with us since the beginning. And we're always pleased to see him at these events. Steve, please take it away.
So I'm Steve Mister. I'm the president of the Council for Responsible Nutrition. And I'm going to talk about this year a little bit about some of the voluntary programs that are going on in the industry. I do lots of different talks at these things. Some years I've looked at the science, some years I've looked at some of our advocacy role, things that we're working for with Congress and FDA. But this is kind of an interesting year for the industry because there are a lot of self-regulatory events going on. And so I want to focus on them. So we're an industry trade association. Our focus is a little different than some of the other ones you've heard about. We focus, as you can see, our mission is exclusively on dietary supplements and functional foods. So we don't look so much at whether they are herbs or whether they are coming from fish oils or whether they're coming from vitamins or minerals being harvested out of the ground. The focus of our association is on the category of dietary supplements, as that's defined under the federal law, and functional food. And we define functional foods as foods that are fortified with dietary ingredients, so ingredients that could have been put into a dietary supplement, but are put into such a matrix and a food function that the law requires that they be labeled as food with a nutrition facts label as opposed to a supplement facts label. So think about some of the shakes, the bars, the protein powders, the meal replacements. They'll have a nutrition facts label on them, but they will contain a lot of the same things that you just as easily could have put into a supplement. So that's our mission. This is a snapshot of who we are. We're based here in Washington, D.C. We have a staff of 20. We have 120 voting members. As you can see, they're kind of equally divided between the companies who make and market finished products and the companies that make and market the raw materials, like DSM that Michael talked about. We do have some associate members. Those tend to be companies that provide ancillary services in the industry but don't actually make a product. We do what we do on about $6.5 million a year, and we've been at it since 1974. So this, hopefully you'll recognize a lot of these labels. These are just some, certainly not all of our members, and hopefully many of them are household names that you'll see in your own shelves. Just quickly, a raise of hands. How many of you take at least one dietary supplement? Okay, keep your hands up. If you take something other than a multivitamin, keep them up. Otherwise, put your hand down. I always like to know what the audience is that I'm talking to. Okay, Michael, these are all the people who are deficient. Look at this, the ones that did not have their hands up. You need to talk to them. All right. So, as I said, we are an industry trade association, but we actually do vet our members. So not anybody who wants to be a member of CRN can join. And we look at things like their history of regulatory compliance, their history of advertising claims and things like that. And so, I was particularly troubled when I saw the presentation coming out of the Department of Defense earlier, because it reminds me that there are products in the market that shouldn't be there. Now, I think there is a caution to over-extrapolating from her data, and I think she was very careful in how she did that. But notice that most of those products that were tested did come in there. That was not a random sampling of the industry. They came in because they had been associated with an adverse event or somebody had raised concerns about them. So while I certainly don't question the test results, I would hate if people walked away thinking that 69% of products in the marketplace contained a stimulant, because I think it's a very small subset of the industry. Well, about 4 or 5 years ago, we decided at CRN we were tired of having to defend that part of the industry. They were not us, and they certainly did not represent the mainstream supplements. So we embarked on what we consider to be a very strong narrative that talks about the tale of two industries. There are the responsible players that make up the majority of the mainstream products, starting with the multivitamin and then going from there. And then there is the other part, the corners of the industry that sell stimulants and steroids and things like that and pass them off as if they were dietary supplements when they are clearly illegal products that should be prosecuted. And so as we develop this narrative of the tale of two industries, one of the things that I want to stress is that as researchers, you have a role in this just like we have a role in this in industry. Consumers have a role in this. When consumers create a demand for these products, they're culpable in this. When industry puts these products on the market, they're culpable in this. When FDA ignores the offenders and doesn't prosecute them to the full extent of the law, they're culpable in this. We all have a role to maintain the health of this dietary supplement marketplace. So, in that regard, this year, last year, the industry embarked on several voluntary programs. The one I'm going to spend most of my time talking about is a voluntary registry of products. So, what happened was we started listening to the regulators, and I'm sure you've already heard some presentations about what is the state of dietary supplement regulation. And of course, there are many tools available to regulators to go after the bad guys. But what we kept hearing is that FDA doesn't really know who's in the industry. They didn't have a way, if they needed to find out what ingredients are in which products, to identify that very quickly. Now, we were not willing to give them pre-market approval. That's a bad word in our industry. We were not willing to give them pre-market approval over the products, but we recognized that this was a problem. FDA ought to know what the marketplace looks like. And so this spring, we have launched something called the Supplement OWL. It stands for the Online Wellness Library. And it is a registry of products and labels. It is intended to be a snapshot of what the dietary supplement industry looks like at any point in time. So when products come off the market, they come out of the OWL. When new products come into the market, they will get put into the OWL. One of the things that's critical about this is that the manufacturers are responsible for keeping this current. This is an industry-run, voluntary program, and so the members of the industry, the companies who market these products, have skin in the game to make sure that their entries are up and available. So there are two tiers of information in the Supplement OWL. The first tier is available to anyone who wants to log in, and I'll give you that website. In fact, I think I gave you that back there, www.supplementowl.org. It's live now if you want to take a look at it. So the first tier basically provides a product image, an image of the full label, and then we take what's on the label and pull that into about 18 different searchable fields. In addition to that, companies are required to either provide who actually makes the product. You know, many of them will say distributed by Walmart, but they don't tell you as a consumer who makes that. They must provide to us, to be in the registry, the identity of the company that actually makes the product, or the contact information for somebody in their company that FDA could contact on a 24/7 basis if they needed to. And that little piece of information is the one thing that consumers don't see, but FDA does see. We are making this fully available to the agency. So if they have a spike in adverse events on a Saturday morning, they would be able to use our registry to identify all of the products that have ginseng in them. And they would be able to tell who makes them, and they might find that it's not a problem with the ingredient, but that they all trace back to the same contract manufacturer, and that would let them know that they've got a manufacturing problem rather than an ingredient problem. Tier 2 of the registry is really a tool more for retailers. It's where manufacturers and marketers can upload all kinds of additional information about their products, their testing protocols, their spec sheets, proof that they've had a GMP certification by a third party, and retailers will be able to see that on a permission basis. So I'm not going to go real quick through these because you can now go to the website and do your own searches. I always put these in here because I don't trust the Wi-Fi. And if I just put a link and I try to click on there, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But you can see, this is what some sample screens out of the website look like. So there you'd see the full product image, you'd see some materials about the product. There I talked about pulling out 18 fields of information from the label. You can see there what some of those are: serving sizes, allergen statements on the label, statements of identity on the label, the UPC number on the label. You can compute how many what the percent of the DV is, and if it's a product that you might take more than once a day, like it's a meal replacement, you can change that number from 1 serving to 2 servings and find out how much of the ingredients you would be getting in a day. So, why did we do this? Well, again, we think that this is a first step to shining daylight on the industry. I think it was, I'm blanking on the Supreme Court, a Supreme Court justice who said that sunlight is the best disinfectant. And so that's what this operates on. We are not qualifying products to get into this registry. It's not only the A-tier companies get in. Both CRN members and non-CRN members are being encouraged to put their products and labels in the registry. But we're doing this under the theory that if you have a place that's visible and companies are accountable for what they put in, it makes it easier for regulators and our critics and stakeholders in the industry and even consumers to see what they're getting. So first of all, it develops demonstrates a proactive self-regulation by the industry. It strengthens our relationship with FDA because it says to them, we're willing to give you this information, even the actual manufacturer of the product that they wouldn't find on the label, they can get through the registry. It counters the perception that the agency can't know what the industry looks like because we're giving it to them. And it could serve as a model if there ever was a mandatory registration. It's better that the industry develop that prototype for itself first than basically have somebody else do it to them down the road. We think it will assist retailers in helping them to make more decisions. I've spent a good deal of my time in the last several months visiting the major retailers in their offices, Walmart, Walgreens, Target, Sam's Club, Costco, et cetera. And they're very interested in this registry and using this registry as a way to help them decide what products make it to their shelf. And then we think ultimately it helps consumers because anyone with a website connection can get into it. We think it will improve our perception that the industry does, the responsible industry does take this seriously. So when I ask, do I think that this will build trust over time? Absolutely, I think it will. It's not going to solve the problems in the industry, but it's the first step to being more visible to our stakeholders. In addition to that, we have a number of other voluntary programs. So at CRN, we develop programs for our members around all these areas. Everything from how you measure protein to be sure we're not protein spiking with amino acids, to how probiotics are labeled and addressing the issue of, well, why would you label a probiotic by weight instead of CFU, which is a more reasonable way for consumers to tell what they're getting. So all of these are on our website if you're interested in more. We also have a program with the National Advertising Division of the Better Business Bureau. This is a program we've been doing for 10 years now where companies can challenge each other's claims. So if a competitor is putting out a claim that it works 3 times faster or that can help to reduce your cold symptoms, which they shouldn't be doing, or if they say that this is 5 times, krill oil is 5 times better than fish oil, companies can challenge each other's claims in this forum, and they go to the marketer. It's a voluntary program, but there are some consequences if you don't participate. And the Better Business Bureau asks you to provide us with your data, substantiate the claims you make. They evaluate it and come out with a decision as to whether they believe that the ad and the claims that are in it are truthful, not misleading, and sufficiently substantiated to support the claim. If you are interested, there are your websites. And again, like Merle, I know you have access to the deck, so you'll have time to go back and look at these in more detail. We also have a brochure for retailers to help them be sure that they are not making impermissible claims in their stores, particularly if you have sales clerks in the aisle who might get a little overzealous and talk about how their grandmother quit taking their prescription medicine because they're now taking these supplements and now their grandma's great. Well, we know that you can't do that legally, and we're trying to educate retailers as to what the law allows and doesn't allow. In addition, I want to do a shout out to Appa. They're working on raw material guidelines right now for the industry, which will help standardize the quality of supply chains, making sure that the finished product manufacturer who's bringing raw herbs and botanicals into their facilities is asking all the right questions about how they were harvested, how they were processed, if there were extracts or solvents used, were the extracts and solvents properly removed from the product, all the way through to the finished product. So they're going to be working on that. I think they've just published that. And then another effort by the Global Retailers and Manufacturers Alliance is looking to develop uniform standards for third parties who certify companies to GMPs. One of the problems is that we'll have somebody who has this fancy seal that they'll offer to put on your product. They'll come in and they'll look at your product, or you'll look at your facility and say that you passed the GMP regulations with flying colors. If another inspector went in there the next day, they might say something very different because we don't have a standardization among what are the requirements for GMPs. We know what the regulations say, but among those auditors, the standards will vary dramatically. So again, a lot of things going on in the industry right now as we are trying to up our game on a voluntary basis. When you sit back and look at the political climate right now, there's a lot of talk about less regulation and less enforcement and less resources going to government agencies. We think it's very important in the industry that we use this time. It's like when your parents go away for the weekend. Do you have the party or not have the party? We don't want to have the party. We want the industry to use this time to show that we can be responsible and do the right thing. Because we know the pendulum will swing back, and we also know if there's a perceived vacuum from FDA, states and state attorneys general and private litigants and class action lawyers are more than happy to step in and fill the vacuum if they feel that there's a vacuum created. And the industry wants to be sure that we're doing it right. That's the end of my formal presentation, but I would encourage you to look at my slides. There are some slides on some other topics that I just thought you might be interested in that show some of the results of our consumer survey, and, some of the other work that we do at CRN.
Many thanks, Steve. opportunity, folks, to ask them some questions. And maybe there are some opportunities for discussion among the group at the table as well. Settling in. So we always appreciate when you do this, and the players change a little bit from time to time, but the concepts are constant, and we think this is an important opportunity for our audience to hear from you. Do you have questions for our industry speakers? Yes, please.
This is a question for our last speaker. So the website that you discussed is meant to build trust. And my question is there any concern of, I guess, overgeneralizing that trust to some of those performance-enhancing supplements that we heard about, and supplements that have actually been shown to be contaminated and dangerous?
I think I understand your question, so if I don't, come back again and help direct me where you want me to go. Any product that is in the industry theoretically could be in this registry. So, somebody who makes some of those products that were shown in the DoD presentation, they could come and they could put their products in. But if they put them in and those things are on the label, it becomes a red flag to FDA. Because we know FDA will use this. We've had meetings with FDA as we've developed the registry. We know they will use the registry as an enforcement tool. So I think there's a great risk to somebody, in this notion that, being visible and transparent about your product also puts you in a bullseye if you're doing it wrong. So while it's possible that a company who is making a less than reputable product could be in the registry, and that we understand that, it is intended to be a snapshot of the industry, good, bad, and ugly. What we think will happen over time is that reputable companies will be in the registry. The other ones will want to hide in the corners of the industry they will not want to be. And then retailers and consumers who go to the registry, should be asking themselves, if a company is not willing to put their product up in the registry, is this something I really want on my shelf?
How likely is it that consumers will use the registry? We already know that a lot of consumers think that supplements are FDA approved and have trust, and they're misinformed. So how likely is it that they will actually use that tool?
Well, if you'll notice, the consumer is not the primary audience for the registry. The primary audience for the registry are the regulators themselves. I mean, we started by saying the question is, can FDA tell what companies, what products, what ingredients are in the marketplace? So it's primarily intended for FDA, FTC, state departments of health, who are trying to understand better what products are being sold in their jurisdictions. And then secondly, it's a tool for retailers. And I do think retailers will use this. We've had a very positive response from the retailers that we've talked about. When we created this, our board talked about whether we would limit access to it. And we believe that if we didn't make it available to consumers, the industry would be criticized for not being transparent. So that's why it's an open website. You don't have to register even to use it. You don't even have to leave your email address. But we don't really think that it is primarily intended to be a consumer tool at this point. And there certainly is no buy it now component of it. So consumers who are going to do a Google search, they're probably more likely to go do a Google search or an Amazon buy if they're looking to buy product.
Steve, could I ask you a follow-up question to that? The hope is that eventually this will become significantly populated so that it can be used by the regulators, by others, to be able to assess the state of the industry at a moment in time. Do you have a trajectory, a timeline for how long, based on what you've started to get into the registry, about how long do you think it will take? And I know that's a loaded question.
No, it's a question that I don't have a clear answer to. We opened the registry in April with, I believe, 3,500 products, and within the first couple of weeks, we got another 500 added to there. So it's starting to grow. Again, that's we think there's probably about 55,000 products. I bet you've heard over the last couple of days, lots of wild numbers. And so no one really knows. But we think about 55,000 unique products. Might be different SKUs of the same product, 60 count, 100 count. We're making it a requirement for our members that they must be substantially compliant with the registry by the end of the year. So I think that at that point, that becomes a good time frame. We've got 6 months to see how many we can get in there.
So I'll ask you the same question next year and look forward to seeing progress.
And I should mention, one of the pieces, we looked at what ODS is doing and the registry or the database that you have. One of the things that we have committed to all along is that we will, when people bring their products to us, we will send them over to ODS so that it populates your registry as well.
Right, and something that we appreciate. There'll be a little bit of an opportunity for the audience to hear tomorrow from a person in our office, Joyce Merkel, about the database efforts that we're involved in. I alluded to it in early remarks that we had this dietary supplement label database. And I think it's fair to say that there are areas of real commonality between what we have been doing and what you're doing. But there were also areas of difference in focus. And that was probably one of the reasons why CRN felt that it needed to move in a slightly different direction. But it is worth noting that there is continued collaboration over the population.
Absolutely. I mean, that's very important to us. We feel like that our two databases complement each other. If a researcher wants to know what was in the marketplace in 2010, they're going to go to your database because yours is going to have historical information.
Correct.
If they want to see only what's in the market today, we're probably the better place to go because we will be taking things out of it as they go off the market.
Yeah, fair enough. Are there other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Yes, thanks. Very good talks, all of you. I am a researcher, and I learned the hard way that it's good to test the product that I'm using in my research in terms of its composition and solubility before I do the research study. And I've also learned that I need to look on the labels for the USB or the consumer lab, labeling on products. And I just find that there are very few companies that actually utilize this labeling system. And I feel like it's a really good way to assess the quality of products, if you don't have access to a lab, if you're a consumer, to do it yourself. So why isn't there more pressure for that to happen, for more companies to use this type of labeling system?
Hi. So with respect to botanical products, which American Herbal Products is most concerned of, there's not really a patent system for plants that are natural and in the market. So things that have substantial added costs over and above providing an excellent product and having a safe manufacturing environment and a chain of doing identification work can be interrupted by the additional overheads of having additional seals produced and set up and the not necessarily financially responsible costs of some of the additional testing. In some cases, companies have decided that following a USP guidance, I know especially with mineral vitamins products, there's some excellent ways of getting those on labels in an affordable fashion. But it's a balance between what resources are available and what the price of the commodity can support.
Do either of the others of you have comments about this?
Well, I would agree with Merle that part of it is the sort of a lack of consensus standard, particularly when it comes to herbs. There is not a broad consensus necessarily of how you measure. And a great example of that, many of you will remember, was 2 years ago when the New York Attorney General went after some herbal products and thought he could do DNA testing on extracts and he would find intact DNA. Again, that's just an example of we're not really far enough along where we have consensus standards for all of the products for testing. Individual companies develop them, but then they don't want to share that with each other or they don't want to share it with a third-party certifier. When it comes to vitamins and minerals, it's a different story. It is a much more uniform area, and that's why you see USP verified on more of the traditional kinds of products. So lack of standards that people have consensus around, the added cost that it does bring to those products even if you have a very high quality product, you go to the extra trouble to get a third-party verification and your competitor doesn't. Now yours is 30 cents more than theirs on the shelf. Who's going to buy your product? And then the last thing I would say is I think lack of consumer demand. I would love to see consumers demand more seals and say, we're not going to buy it unless it has NSF or USP or UL on the label. But no disrespect to the certifiers, they haven't done a particularly good job of marketing what that label means. And so consumers don't know to look for it. I give a shout out to Pharmavite. All the positive media that you see around the USP verified is paid for by Pharmavite because they use it as part of their advertising. But you don't see USP out there telling consumers you need to look for our label.
There was a question in the front here.
My question is more from the practice side. It seems that there's a huge gap between the studies that are done with preparations that have been specifically made for testing in a trial and proprietary products. It would be very useful to healthcare providers in helping patients choose a product if there were studies done using the proprietary products. Given that the preparations are so different, there's combinations, whereas there may be studies done showing an individual herbal product is effective, but what happens when there's 3 different things in the preparation and you don't really know what you can recommend when you're looking at the variety of products. So I'm curious as to why, other than maybe cost, we don't have more companies who would like to have their products tested in some type of trial to show effectiveness of that particular preparation.
As far as I've seen from our members, cost has a really large C. So, many folks, if cost were not an object, I think would be delighted to see more studies.
I would comment that there have been some. Certainly, we heard about the Physician's Health Study. That's a proprietary product that was out there. The challenge often comes because it depends whether a researcher wants to look at a product that's already in the market or whether they want a specific formulation because they're looking at a single, and often it is a single nutrients, that you're looking at isoflavones, or you want something special. You don't want it off the shelf. I actually think that the quality amongst the big brands that are making products, they put as much care into that goes into the retail space as they do for what is used for studies.
And I would say, Michael's company, DSM, does a lot of research and does it on their ingredients so that companies who are buying their ingredients, if they put them in at the recommended levels, are going to be able to rely on those studies and make the efficacy claims based on what's in the studies. We're concerned at CRN about companies who will pick an ingredient that may have some very good research on it, but then they don't put enough of the ingredient in to match the studies. And I think that's what your question goes to. So that program that I talked about with the National Advertising Division, there are any number of cases where companies, or in some cases CRN, have challenged advertisers who are making a claim. We know where it comes from, we know what the studies are, and we know how much of the ingredient was used in the study, and it's simply not matched in the finished product. And so those cases go before NAD, and NAD looks at it and says, you know what, you can't rely on studies at 50 milligrams if you're only putting in 20. And so they come back and say the claim is not substantiated.
That's part of the problem. I think the other part of the problem is the combinations. There are so many manufacturers that rather than use the ingredient that's been studied and shown to be effective, they'll add 3 or 4 more that are proposed for that purpose but not necessarily well studied. And then you're kind of in a quandary of, is that something to recommend or not? So that's more the issue, I think.
Did you have something you wanted to say, Mike?
Yeah, in fact, sure. I agree with you entirely, but that's part of that is driven by the consumer pressure. if there's two products on the shelf side by side and one has one ingredient for this benefit and another one is new and improved with something else added, the reality is that manufacturers are always trying to catch up or chase those opportunities. And it comes back to the same issue with the seal of approval. Sometimes those are brand manager decisions, but really it's looking at, what are our costs that we have in this product? And then at the end of the day, does the consumer, value that? So if they don't see a seal of approval and there's market research showing that there's no change in buying patterns, then that impacts the decision of using a seal of approval. If there's concept testing and this product with another ingredient shows consumer interest, and then they'll make those changes often.
I think there was a question here and then one at the back.
It's great how much organizations like yours and industry is stepping up to really take leadership in, things the FDA doesn't have the resources to provide. Do you think there's enough participation in the industry or enough good guys to keep supplements on the shelf versus behind the counter to sort of protect DSHEA type regulatory frameworks from people that want to control everything? It's a hard one to call, but
the amount of incredible passion, attention to detail, commitment to safety and the consumer, and the service attitude that I've seen at industry events makes me absolutely confident that the good folks will rise to the top, like the cream in the coffee. Thank
There's
you.
a question in the back, and I think it may be...
Can I just add a comment?
All right, sure.
The other challenge that we face is, I would bet most of those products that we heard from the Department of Defense are bought on the internet, that they are not purchased in a retail environment. And I can tell you that many of the biggest brands, the retail space is very competitive to stay there, and they're challenged heavily by internet sales. So it is a very difficult situation, and I only encourage you to buy from brands that are known and trusted.
There was a question at the back, and could you turn your mic off in the front? Thank you. Yes.
Hi, so this is a comment and a question for Merle. So I was really happy to see the one slide on the OSHA Harvest Sustainability Project. And I know you didn't have a lot of time to talk about, any one slide individually, but Kelly Kincher is a really excellent example of somebody who is an alpha taxonomist and has ethnobotany and plant population ecology background and has been willing to do everything from cultivation studies to looking into the archaeological record and pretty much everything with medicinal plants. And he's prepared reports before on echinacea and native physalis species in the United States. So it's good to see that he's involved directly with AHPA. And so I wanted to, if you're privy to how this happened, did he decide to start working on OSHA and then involve AHPA? Or how is that organized? Is it informal, or is there some sort of granting program? How did that work?
I believe there's a function that's like a granting program. So if you have research that might need funding, certainly reach out to me. I can make sure that it's brought to the folks' attention.
Yeah, because it would be good to learn about AHPA-specific funding opportunities for that sort of work. Great.
Well, look, folks, this has been great. Can I have a round of applause for our speakers for this panel?